Looking to add the OpenAI Assistants API to your Bubble app? In my opinion, the Assistants API is kind of like the Completions API on steroids.
Will you look at me?
With the Assistant, it can maintain the context of your messages throughout multiple chat sessions. It can also integrate additional tools like the OpenAI Code Interpreter. Look, there's so many awesome use cases for adding this API to your Bubble app. I'm gonna hand this one over to Luca, and he's gonna walk you through all of the step-by-step instructions you need to follow.
Hello everyone, today we're going to be integrating the ChatGPT Assistants API. Now before we've worked a lot with the Completions API, but there are quite a few differences and some are better. So a Completions API call is probably better for some things, where an Assistant API is probably a lot better for other things. So the example of Assistants is in the actual ChatGPT interface. So all of the chats you create and all of these GPTs, as well as the ability to create a custom GPT, which you need Plus for, all use the Assistants API. So that has things like the code interpreter, you can add files, all those kind of functionalities are only available in the actual Assistants API. Whereas Completions is really good for quick little things because the latency is a lot lower, so it takes less time for a message to come back. But this is just a little article about it. But yeah, it's designed to maintain a longer context and better at specific tasks, so customer inquiries, etc. And you can load it up with a lot more information than a Completions call, because in the Completions call, all you have to work with is the actual system message, where an assistant, you can give it a bunch of documents, for example. And if you were, for example, creating like a help page or something, which we've done before with the Completions, which in hindsight we should have done with the Assistants, you can load it up with all the company documentation and it has access to all that information in the form of PDFs and files, etc. So let's do a little demo. So here it's just gonna basically be the same as how all the other things work, but I'll just say rap to me like Drake. But here you can just add a massive amount of data in the actual instructions part. I'm gonna generate the assistant. I'm going to say, hi, how's it going? And then we've got a nice little wrap here. Now, the way we set up an assistant is very different, and it's probably more complicated in some ways in terms of the API setup, but it's less complicated in terms of the memory because it actually stores its own memory. So you don't have to go through the whole rigmarole of pasting in all the previous chats in every response. You can basically just allow OpenAI to handle all of that in these things called threads. So as you can see here, these are all the API calls we need to actually go through to set this up. We've got the create an assistant call, the create a thread call, which is that first little tab that came up. And then we're creating a message and we're running the assistant. So essentially, if you don't run the assistant, then the assistant's not gonna do anything. It will just sit there and stand there, which is different to the Completions call. And once you run the assistant will run, but you're not gonna get any payload back. You just told it to run, and you get the messages by doing this get call or the get messages. And for this get response here, as well as the message creation, we're actually doing every 1 second. So we're doing the get call, and if there's not a response from the GPT, it's not creating a message. And then when there is a response from the GPT, we create that message. So it's a little complicated, but we'll go through that now. And this initial chat interface we're not going to actually build out because we've had videos on this before, which we'll link in the description. But today we're going to be going over all of the APIs for the actual assistant. So if we look at the APIs I've got set up right now, you can see we've got the create assistant, run assistant, or create message, sorry. There's quite a few, as you can see. So we've got the create assistant, create thread, create message for the assistant, then we're running the assistant, and then we're getting the messages from the assistant in a kind of recursive way. So let's jump into a new page and set this up. So now we've got a new page here. What we're going to do, we're just going to click on the page and center it to column with everything lining up in the middle here. I'm going to drag some text onto the page, center it, really bad at spelling assistant. And then just make it big. This is just the title, just make it look nice. Do our orange here, bold, lovely. So we then have two groups here. We're going to drag a group onto the page. We're going to center it in the middle of the page, and we'll just uncheck, make it fixed width and height. And then we can get on to actually putting stuff in the group. So this group we're going to be calling create assistant / thread. And so what we need on this is very simple, is just our button. We'll center this as well. We'll generate assistant, turn to a nice orange as well. And then we shall get a multi-line input for our instructions. And then we'll center this as well, adding 20 pixels on the bottom. And then if we click onto the actual group, let's center this in the center as well. I'm just gonna click on the assistant and add 100 pixels on the top so it looks a little bit nicer. Perfect. That first group set up, it is gonna be visual on page load, but we do wanna collapse it when it's hidden. And if we hide it now, we can work on our second group here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go and copy the actual chat interface. As I said before, we've got a video on how to create this. I'll quickly run through it. But let's add another group to start off with. Just hit next, and then again, if we expand it. Now, in this group, I'm just gonna paste our chat. So what is in the chat group essentially is just a repeating group, and each cell of the repeating group contains both the message from the assistant and your message. Obviously we've got a chat database, and a chat contains multiple messages, and then to show only your message or the GPT's message, it's just a conditional state. So we can see on this condition, when the current cell's message creator is the current user, then it comes up. But when the message in the cell is not the current user, then it's going to be the API. And then you sort these by creation date, and that is basically the interface. But again, we've got more in-depth videos on this, so check that video out. So now we're going to need to set up some custom states to store our IDs for our API. So if we click on the page, go to this little eye icon, you see this custom state. Now you could obviously store this under the chat so that it's not cleared if the page refreshes, but just to keep it simple for this video, I'm going to use a custom state for this. So the first one we need to store is the assistant ID, and then do that as text. We're going to need to store the thread ID, and then that's going to be text as well. And then we also want to have the actual chat that we're going to create on that first page. So we'll create a chat, and then the data types as chat here. Perfect. If we look at our database, you can see we've got chats, and the data type of chats, we've got messages, and it's a list of messages. And on the messages, all we actually need is the creator section and the message content section. If we were doing the completions, we would need this JSON, but we actually don't need to worry that for this tutorial, which is fantastic. If you've ever done it before, there's lots of errors that can happen if you don't do it exactly correct. So perfect. So now we've got our custom state set up. What we're going to do is head over to OpenAI and generate our API key. So if you go to the OpenAI website, you're going to want to create an account and then log in. And then you'll be able to go to dashboard here, where you can see we've got this API key section. You're just gonna click create a new key here. You call it whatever you want. Create a new key. And now this is the key that's gonna allow us to have access to all the APIs and run our APIs. So if we click copy here, click done, we'll go back to our Bubble account and go to plugins. So the only plugin you'll need for this is the OpenAI connector. If you click add plugins, type in API connector, grab this and hit install, and then you'll be able to access it here. So you're going to want to add another API, and just so we've got our store of this key, we're just going to go down and paste it into here for later use. But let's name this API OpenAI, and it is private key in header, which is giving us our authorization here. So now all we need to do is like bearer space, then paste that API key in here, and now the authorization will work for all our API calls. Yep. And we need to add another header here, which is content dash type. That's going to equal application slash JSON. And that's just telling OpenAI what to expect when we're talking about our API payloads, which is what we're going to be sending. So we can now go ahead and start our first call here. So if we go back to OpenAI, go to API reference and scroll down to assistants, you can see we've got all these different things. What we're going to want to do first of all is click on assistant and create assistant. This is the piece of code you want. So if I break this down, this is the header, which we've just coded into the API connector. But there's going to be another one for this call, which is the assistants v2. And then this is the body of our call, which is all our parameters that we get to choose. And then once we have all this set up, it's going to be, perfect. We don't want code interpreter, or you can do files. So we're just going to make some edits to that. So all we have to do is actually copy the CURL from here, go to our bubble editor, and you can see we've got this import another call from CURL, paste that in. Perfect. So we can delete the application JSON and the bearer, and we're then to keep this one here. Annoyingly, Bubble does not just get rid of them, they stay open. So what I'm going to do is just going to copy this and add it in. I'm going to go back and just make sure I get the exact right part of this. Lovely, now we're all set up. So we'll call this create assistant here. We're going to want to use it as an action so we can access it as an action in our workflows. And we're pretty much set up. I'm just going to delete this ability for it to use the code interpreter just to make this tutorial a little bit more simple. And then just to check everything's working, we can hit initialize and we get our payload back properly. So that's our first call. If you wanted to change the GPT to maybe GPT 2.5 turbos, make it a little bit quicker, you could do that here. But just for now, we're going to leave this as is. Now the next call we're going to need to grab is this threads. We're gonna hit the create a thread. It's gonna be the same process, but actually all we need for this is again this section and then this, because we've already done this part of it. So if we just copy it, go back to the bubble, insert another call from CRL, paste that in. Now we've got our create thread. Then delete all these. Assistance equals v2, assistance equals v2, lovely. And again, all we need to do for this one is initialize. We're gonna add it in our actions, however, and then we're gonna hit initialize, your request to get. So we need to change this to post. Initialize it again, and now we get our thread being created. Hit save. So at this point, we've set up the create assistant call and the create thread call. So now we need to add a message from us into this thread, and then this thread is going to be associated with this assistant. So let's go to the API reference, go onto messages under the assistants beta. We're going to copy the URL again. Going to go to the bubble editor. So you can see these APIs can be a little bit repetitive sometimes. Do exactly the same thing. I'm going to copy this, delete, 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 add a header. V2. This one is create message. Again, turn it to action. It's already set to post this time. And we can initialize our call. No thread found. Okay, right. So as you can see here in the URL, I just failed to mention, we're actually passing our thread ID into this call. So how we do that in Bubble is we actually just do square brackets either side of the thing we dynamically want to enter data into in the URL. And as you can see, we get this ability to add in our thread here. We want to uncheck the private element. And then to initialize the call, we just need to grab this thread or a thread that we've created. So instead of reinitializing, you can hit manually enter the API response, and then you get your payload again. Just hit save for everything. And then we're just going to paste into here our thread ID, hit initialize, and we've created a new message in that thread. Perfect. So now we have got a message within our thread. We can now run our specific assistant. So if we go to here, go to runs, create a run, we will copy again the URL from the create run call and import it into Bubble. Perfect. You can see we've got this thread ID that we need to do again, but let's rename our call first of all, turn it to an action. We're going to leave it as post. We can delete all these. Assistance equals v2. And then let's add our square brackets to the thread ID. Then we can grab our thread again, which is going to be this one. Oh. Paste that into our dynamic value here. We need to uncheck the private again. And now we have our assistant ID here. Now we do a dynamic value because we need to add our assistant ID into here dynamically. It's actually different between the URL and the body. For the body, we actually use the greater than sign and then another greater than sign, but the other way. Now we can dynamically add this in. So I'm just going to go to when we created our assistant initially, grab its ID in the ID field here. And then we're going to paste that in to our dynamic value here. Hit initialize, and we get our payload back. Now, at the moment, we have created our thread and our assistant, we have created our message, and we've told our assistant to go and think about that. So now we need to actually retrieve all our responses, and the create message and the get message, or get all messages, call is actually exactly the same, except it's a get instead of a post. So what we can do is we can right click and duplicate the call. As you can see here, we've got our create message, and then we've got our create message copy here at the bottom. So we'll call this get message. Turn it to get. Got a thread ID here, and then if we hit reinitialize, and if we show the raw data, we can see that we've got our response. So our first message we created here, role user, and then we get our message role assistant. And so it said a bunch of these things. So if we actually look at this response we get back, we can see that the last messages are actually come up first in the list, and that's an important thing just to take a note of for some sequential steps that we're going to be taking. So if we just hit save, now we've actually set up all of the different calls needed to get this working. And now we just need to create our workflows to get this all working nicely. So if we go onto our design tab, at the moment we've got our chat group completely hidden, and we have our create assistants. Let's work on the create assistant flow here. I'm just going to make sure this group B can be hidden. So if we hide it, it'll disappear. Lovely. So if we click on our button here, we go to appearance, and then we add a workflow. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a new thing. That thing is going to be a chat. We can leave that there. We can now go to our plugins, and we can now find our create assistant. Cool. And then if we go ahead and delete everything in the instructions between these two speech marks, we can now insert some dynamic data. Then we can find our multi-line input A, its value. Perfect. And then we can name it something. If we actually want to name something, let's quickly circle back and find an input here. Again, center it. I'm just going to add 10 pixels on the bottom. And let's make this 250 as well, so it just lines up nicely. And while we're here, we may as well do the button as well. Lovely. Feel free to change these input fields here. But let's go back to our data tab here, and then now we can insert some dynamic data for the name as well. So our input A is value. Perfect. Now we go to a new action and find our create thread. We can just leave that there. And now we want to hide our create thread group, and we want to show our group B, which has our chat interface in there. Perfect. So now we've created the thread, we've created the assistant, and now we're going to go ahead and get our chat working here. So I believe the chat that I've got is not visible on page load, so I'm just going to change that there. Now what we're going to be doing is actually putting in the data for this chat. So we need to go to our repeating group and then give it something to grab onto. So if we go to our page, we can grab our custom state. So you can see we've got our chat and its messages here, because our repeating group is type messages. And we need to populate this from our first step. So we actually need to go and add another workflow, which is set state of an element, another action, sorry. It's going to be v2. Going to have its chat. It's going to be the chat we create in the result step 1. Need our assistant ID, which we created in step 2, and it's going to be ID. And then we need to also add our thread ID, which is where we created in step 3, and it's the ID again. Perfect. So I'm actually going to move the set state to directly after. So all the data is already there before our group is actually shown. Now we can go and create some workflows for our message here. So if we go onto our icon used to send the message, then we can add a workflow. So the first one we need to do is we need to create a new thing, and that thing is going to be a message. This one's going to be coming from the current user, so it formats properly in our message repeating group. And then we're going to have our message content, and that's going to be the input you're using for that send a message. And now let's go to our plugins here, and we can now use our create message. Again, we can go to the content and delete that and insert the input as well you're using for the message. And then next we're gonna add another action, and we're gonna immediately get our run. So get our assistant thinking about it. So now this is where we use our custom state to grab our thread ID. And then we go to our custom state for our assistant ID. Perfect. Now we need to make sure we are updating our chat, because at the moment we just created a new message in our database and we've not added it to the chat that we're showing the user. So if we make changes to a thing, that thing is going to be the assistant chat, which is the custom state under our page. Going on messages, and we're going to add the result of step 1. Perfect. And I'm actually going to do this here so that the user doesn't have to wait to see their message come up and for these to run. So you might be thinking at this point, how are we going to get our response back from the AI? When are we getting our get call? So you could put your get call in here, but if you do it immediately, it doesn't give it enough time for the assistant to actually go and think about it. And so you'll just get your message that you sent back. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to add a new workflow, and we're going to do the workflow every 5 seconds, but then we're going to change that to 2 seconds. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be constantly getting all the messages. So if we go onto plugins here and grab get message, again, we want to pop in our assistant's thread ID here. And then we're going to add some conditionals on this create message. But when the AI has actually created a response, we're going to create that new message and populate it into the chat. So if we do create a new thing, that thing is going to be message. We're going to leave the creator empty this time for our repeating group formatting, and the message content is going to be the result of step 1's, and that's going to be its data. And then we've got our each item's content, which is the response. And you might be thinking, oh, it's going to be the last item because it's going to be the last thing that the AI has done. But because it formatted with all the latest stuff at the top, we're actually going to pick first message here. And then you can see we can grab this text value. Perfect. And then again, we want to make changes to a thing. That thing's going to be the assistant's chat. And we're going to add our message that we created in step 2. Now, if you did that and just left it as it is, it would just be pulling a bunch of times every 2 seconds, and it would just be adding your message if the AI hadn't been thinking about it. So we need to add some conditionals or only whens onto these 2 actions here. So we only want this to actually happen when the result of step 1's data items role first item is assistant. So for context on that, I'll do a little thing here. So if we go to our actual get message here and we look at our response, you can see that we've got our role here, and our message is going to be a user, but when the system actually creates a message for you, it's the role is assistant. So that's why we're doing that there. You might think this would be enough, but it's not actually enough, because it's just going to do it all the time. So when the system has the last system message is assistant, then it's just going to be continuously adding those messages again and again and again into the chat, which we do not want. And so how we get around this, we actually add another thing here where we say and the result of step 1's data first item content text value first item is not assistant's chats messages last items message content. So what we're saying there is essentially we don't want another message to be created when the message from the AI is the same as the last message in the chat. And so that just stops it from repeatedly adding that message to the chat. because it just stops this create the message and add it to chat workflow when it's already added at once. So if we copy this expression, then we paste it into here as well, we should be fully set up, but let's go ahead and test our workflow here. Oh, okay, so we've got this come up immediately. Let's refresh. If we make our group be not visible on page load as well. I think that was the issue. And then we have a look at this. Perfect, right. Let's try again. So name, J. Cole, only hit generate assistant. Perfect. So now we're gonna create a message. So perfect. We've got our assistant set up properly. As I say, you want to really do this when you want to preload your GPT with a bunch of data, and probably for more complex tasks, as well as if you wanted to add the capabilities of adding files or the code interpreter, for example, you have to use the assistant. So I really hope you've enjoyed the tutorial, and yeah, let us know what you're building in the comments so we can make some videos that are maybe more in line with what you guys are building at the moment. But this has been, yeah, the assistants video, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Cheers.
And just like that, you now know how to integrate the OpenAI Assistants API into your Bubble app. If you found this video useful and you wanted to stay up to date with any additional Bubble resources we share, I'd always recommend hitting that subscribe button on my channel. This will just make sure you're the first to know whenever I drop a new tutorial. For now though, I just wanted to say a massive thank you for watching this specific video, and I wish you all of the best on your own no-code journey.